All right, let's take a look at section 3.2, which is parallel lines and transversals. What we're going to do is take everything from 3.1 that we learned about the different angle relationships, and we're going to apply that today with two parallel lines cut by a transversal. And we'll see something interesting about these angle pair relationships. Let's start right here with 3.1. There's different theorems. The first one right here is corresponding angles theorem. It states if two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, then the pairs of corresponding angles are congruent. So you can see that in the diagram, corresponding angles, for example, like 2 and 6 are congruent. They show that 3 and 7 happen to be congruent as well. And there's two other pairs, and hopefully you realize that 1 and 5, they're corresponding as well. Okay, so we could also add angle 1 and angle 5. Let's go ahead and put angle 1 is congruent to angle 5. And then also angle 4 is congruent to angle 8. Next up, we have alternate interior angles. If two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, then the pairs of alternate interior angles are congruent. So remember, alternate interior are there, hopefully we realize, is inside of the parallel lines. So angles 3 and 6, those right there are alternate interior angles that are congruent, and angles 4 and 5 are also a pair of alternate interior angles congruent. Let's go ahead and move on. We have alternate exterior angles theorem. And so once again, two lines cut by a transversal, the alternate exterior angles are congruent. So we can see that angles 1 and 8 are congruent. And they also look congruent. They're both obtuse angles. And so are angles 2 and 7, which are both acute angles. And then the last theorem right here that we have in this section is that of consecutive interior angles. Now, these ones are different. Consecutive interior angles, hopefully we realize that when I take a look at angles 3 and angles 5, they do not look like they are congruent at all. Okay? Because they're not. What they're saying in this is that these two angles, consecutive interior angles, are supplementary. Therefore, angle 3 plus angle 5 is equal to 180. On the right side of the transversal, we could say angle 4 plus angle 6 is equal to 180 as well. So those two angles ends up equaling 180 degrees. So consecutive interior angles happen to be a little different. Don't forget some things that you might have to use throughout this homework assignment as well, is that don't forget we have other angles that are congruent. Vertical angles, so for example 1 and 4 are congruent, 2 and 3 are congruent. Angles 5 and 8 are also congruent, and 6 and 7. So let's see how we could put this all together. Now remember, it says we want to find that the measure of angle 1 and the measure of angle 2, and you have to tell which theorem you would use in each case. There could be multiple ways you could find an angle measure. So it depends on how you want to look at things. And I'll go over all the different ways that we could go ahead and talk about them. All right. The first one right here is angle 1. And I'm looking right here, this piece of information, 110. They're inside of the parallel lines and they are cut by the transversal. So hopefully we realize that angle 1 is equal to 110 degrees. We have to have a reason. That is your alternate interior angles. Alternate interior angles are congruent. So let's take a look next up at angle 2. Okay, angle 2 right here, I could look at it two ways. If I compare it to the 110, these two angles right here, hopefully you're thinking to yourself already that they are corresponding. Okay, so those two angles 2 and 110 are corresponding. Or if I compare 1 and 2 right here, they are congruent to each other because they're vertical angles. Or let's go ahead and put right here, vertical angles congruence. All right, so we could use one of those two. So like I said, there's more than one way for you to figure out angle congruence right here in this problem, in these problems. And number 2, look at angle 1 and angle 63. Angle 1 is congruent to 63 degrees. The reason being, they're corresponding. Right? They are on the same side of the transversal, and they're both on the bottom right-hand side. For angle 2 right here, we can go ahead and say that that angle right there is 117. The reason being is we have consecutive interior angles. Remember, these two angles right here, angle 2 for some reason my tablet wants to act up on me right here. But angle 2, let me go ahead and I'll put it right up here. Angle 2 plus 63 degrees is equal to 180. So if you go ahead and subtract 63 to both sides, you will end up with your 117. All right, so consecutive interior angles congruent. You could also figure out that with angle 1 and angle 2, they're also a linear pair. Right? Those two angles right here, they have a relationship of being a linear pair. So I could technically say angle 1 plus angle 2, which happens to be, or angle 1, which is 63. So you can say 63 plus angle 2 is equal to 180. And then this right here would be because they are a linear pair. And you go ahead and subtract 63 to both sides. So let me go ahead and put right here, linear pair. So we've got two reasons for that. Let's go ahead and move on to number 3. I can find angle 1 right here. Hopefully you realize that these two angles, I mentioned it earlier, right at the very last part of the, when we went through the different theorems, is that you have to remember vertical angles. So angle 1 is 95 degrees because we have ourselves vertical angles are congruent. So now I can go ahead and I've got angle 1 and angle 2. I have them highlighted there, and angle 2 is equal to 95 degrees as well because they are on alternating sides of the transversal and they are exterior. So that tells me we have alternate exterior angles congruence. Let's go ahead and move on to number 4. Angle 1 should be 101 degrees. They are vertical from each other. So we got vertical angles are congruent. And then we also have, now that we know that this is 101, there's two ways that we could talk about find angle 2, which is also 101, and that is because if we look, we have corresponding angles. And we also have right here Hopefully you named it alternate interior angles congruence. All right, so let's move on. Now you're going to have to apply all that in actually finding maybe a variable. So like right here on number 5, hopefully we realize we have right here alternate exterior angles. Remember, alternate exterior angles are congruent. So what I can go ahead and say is that x plus 12 is equal to 110 degrees. We can go ahead and subtract both sides by 12, and we'll end up with x being 98. And there you go. Make sure you show your step, subtract 12 to both sides. So we're using the relationships to try to help us solve our problem here. Okay? So if we take a look, drop down, let's see. We could do number 6. The relationship between these two angles is that they are alternate interior angles. And alternate interior angles are congruent. So I can go ahead and say 45 is equal to 10x minus 55. Go ahead and solve for 10 or solve for x. We'll add 55 to both sides. I've got 100 is equal to 10x. Divide both sides by 10, and x is equal to 10. Now you do have to be careful. There are some questions that ask you to solve for x. There are some questions that will ask you to actually figure out what the angle is. And if they do, don't forget to plug things in so you can figure out what is the length of a particular angle. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at let's take a look at number 7. For some reason, they decided to label this angle right here 6. Don't know why, but they did. So let's see, what can we do here? How could I find x? Well, how about one thing I do know, and that's what makes this question a little bit different, is that these two angles right here, and this one I'll put as a question mark, remember, they have a relationship. They are a linear pair. So what I could do is say like question mark plus 52 degrees. That's supposed to be equal to 180. Now let's find this mystery angle by subtracting 52 to both sides. And by doing that right there, I end up with 128. All right, so we now have mystery angle. This is 128. So how about now I take a look at mystery angle and 4x and realize, all right, those two angles are corresponding. And corresponding angles right here are congruent. So 4x is equal to 128. And then I can go ahead and divide both sides by 4, and x ends up equaling 32. Voila. All right, so use all the different skills and different theorems that we have figured out to help you answer these problems. Number 8. This happens to be a good one. Once again, there are multiple ways to solve this. But right here, this angle and the ones that are pointed at each other, this 2x minus 3, those are vertical angles. So what I could say right here is that angle 2 ends up equaling 2x minus 3, right? Because they're vertical. And if this is 2x minus 3, then these two angles have to be consecutive interior, meaning that those two angles, 2x minus 3, let me go ahead, I gotta adjust something right here with my tablet for some reason. All right, so we have 2x minus 3, and if I add that plus 153, that's equal to 180. So we have consecutive interior angles are supplementary, so I take those two and set it equal to 180. And let's go ahead and solve this out. We got 2x plus 150 is equal to 180. Subtract 150 to both sides, and 2x is equal to 30. And then divide both sides by 2, and x is equal to 15. And there you have that answer right there. All right. So we have taken a look at every single example right here. I think we looked at all the scenarios, or almost all of them, to be able to help you be successful right here on section 3.2.